to our May 14th Placer County Planning Commission meeting. And I'd like to start off with the flag salute. Minor, if you do the honors.
You'll join us? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Kathy, if you do roll call.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Here.
Mr. Gray?
Here.
Mr. Crabb?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Brentmo?
Here.
Mr. Denio?
Here. Looks like I got a full house, yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and have our report from the planning director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a brief report today. At the board's meeting on Tuesday, two items that were previously before your commission were heard by the board. The first being the housing element, which the board unanimously approved and directed staff to move that forward to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for final approval. And the second project was the Riola Vineyard project, and that was unanimously approved. The one change being that the board did not support the filling of the floodplain for the small lot residential units, and so the applicant did redesign the project to remove those lots. The board did agree with your commission that it was appropriate to have filling in the ag lots to allow for the preservation of agricultural uses within that project. So it was generally as you had recommended, with the exception of the reduction of, it ended up being 9 lots for the small residential product that they had. I just wanted to make you aware, you will probably hear at some point, that as development continues to wane in this area and the revenues throughout the agency are down, we're looking at the reassignment of some of our staff members right now, both in or all in planning, building, and engineering. We just don't have the workload to maintain the staffing levels that we've had in the past. Consistent with the direction from the board, we're moving forward. Nobody is being laid off. We are reassigning staff to other departments where there is a need right now, and to keep them available so that when conditions change and we have a demand for staff again, they will be readily available to come back and be a part of the development team again. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, and we'll keep you updated as that progresses. That concludes staff's report.
Okay, anybody have any questions, comments? Okay, at this time, if there's anyone in the audience that would like to address the commission on any issues or items that are not on today's agenda. Jerry, did you? I just saw you start pushing
just
buttons.
turning my microphone off.
Okay.
Ken, I have a question for Mike.
Sure.
What's the final determination on the last meeting in May? Do we know yet?
I believe that we do have items, I will go back and verify. We do have items scheduled, so May 26th, I believe.
28th.
28.
Or 28th, I'm sorry.
28th, I think.
The board's meeting on the 26th. We do have items scheduled. There will be a meeting on that day.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing one coming up, and we'll go ahead and go to our 10:05 item, withdrawal of appeal of the zoning administrator's decision on variance in the Tensor residence garage. And I guess,
Mr. Chair, there's no formal presentation. The applicant has requested, and staff
So
concurs, that
we
it would
just
be
vote on it?
appropriate to accept the withdrawal.
yeah, so
So moved.
I have a motion second for the withdrawal. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chair, I would recommend that we take just a brief recess until just before 10:10. That's the time for our next hearing item, just in case there's any members of the public that want to participate in that.
Okay. That being said, we'll wait.
See, the thing is, that's not
I
lost.
came back and got on my regular.
You come in there with all of your experiences.
And I was struggling getting on and off because I got stuck in center bar, you know? You can't balance yourself now, well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then when the guy talked, you could see it.
Okay, we'll get back to our planning commission meeting, our 1010 item, subdivision modification and variance for Golden Hills Estate Unit Number 3, Marskella residence is categorically exempt. And Roy, looks like you're all set.
Thank you, Chair Donayo. The property is zoned RAB 43, which is residential agricultural, combining a building site minimum of 1 acre. The project site is located near the intersection with Miners Drive and Bonanza Way at 4165 Bonanza Way in the Loomis area, and it is shown in your staff report in attachment B. The applicant is requesting approval of a modification of the Golden Hills Estates Unit Number 2 subdivision, which is Lot 14, to modify the 35-foot front setback line on the final map from Bonanza Way to 31 feet in order to construct an addition to the single-family residence. And it's actually a conversion of the existing garage and a 12-foot addition towards Bonanza Way. And this also includes a variance that's required because the front setback with the zoning ordinance requires a 50-foot front setback in this particular zone district. This is a site plan of the property which shows the expansion of the existing garage here. This will be converted and extended an additional 12 feet from towards Bonanza Way. And this line on the site plan shows the 5-foot front setback, which is on the final map. So the line here, this would actually come to 31 feet. And the site plan also shows existing constraints that we have in the staff report. With the variance, there are some large trees in this area here that are circled. There'd be no trees removed as a result of this request. And then at the back of the property, or at the back of the house, just behind the house, this is the septic tank area. And then there's also a septic system here that limit the areas that you could expand the residence on the rear. In addition, with the property, there is a 10-foot drainage easement all along this south side of the property line, adjacent to the south property line. And then along the, what I call the east side, is a 5-foot drainage easement. This existing detached garage here of a little over 900 square feet would be utilized, and there is also an existing driveway all along here that's paved and would be used. This is showing one photo from the northwest corner of the property, showing the existing garage that would be expanded out 12 feet and converted from the garage to residential use. And the materials and the colors would be compatible to the existing home. This is a shot, photo from the southwest corner of the property. And you can see in this location, this is the driveway that exists and goes into the detached garage that's behind the house that's over 900 square feet. And then this is taken straight across from Bonanza Way that shows the large tree in the front here that would not be impacted, and then also a tree up in this area. And then again, the site plan. And staff recommends approval of the modification to the final map to allow the 31 feet instead of the required 35 feet. And also staff recommends approval of the variance from the required 50 feet to the 31 feet. And with that, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
So, Roy, just one quick question. That, they're gonna take out the concrete that's in front of the existing garage, and then that'll be the new driveway coming around and, you know, sort of a horseshoe there, and then park in the back?
At the present time, they would just utilize this driveway that exists and go straight back to this detached garage here. And they would remove the concrete that's in front. And I just talked to Mr. Muscarella, and he had some idea of eventually thinking of the loop driveway, but I don't think right now that that's planned. It could be in the future. And the entry to the house is right in this middle area, and that would remain as it exists today.
Okay.
Roy, I'm a little bit confused here. I guess when I looked at the map, that it appears on the side and in the back, there's a 30-foot easement, setback. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at least as the buildings are shown back there, they appear to encroach in that. So is this the result of a previous variance, or
The structure back here, storage shed?
as well as the garage, the detached garage? They both appear to be within the setback area on the map.
That's a good question. We didn't really look at those two, the detached garage. There was no previous variance that I could tell. There is a potential that it would be non-conforming. I might have to check with that when it was built, and I think the property owner now hasn't been there that long, if he has any history.
Well, yeah, maybe. I guess it kind of brings up the thought in my mind that maybe if those are non-conforming, that we should be including, bring those into conformance with this variance request. But just a thought.
Yes, that could be correct. I don't know.
I guess his question is, and I don't know if it's doable at this time, where if it's a variance for that, if it would cover the whole property.
Unfortunately, it wasn't noticed. I believe we would have to come back then and continue and re-notice if that's the situation.
That would be correct. If staff is not aware, it would appear, as Mr. Johnson noted, that the garage should have a variance as well as a storage shed. It exceeds the size limitations that are allowed for structures within setbacks. So it would appear, if staff is not aware if any variances have been granted, that we should go back and research that, and if necessary, come forward with a complete package that addresses all variances that may be required for this property.
Okay. Thank you.
Start calling you a Hawkeye.
Okay, thanks, Roy. Okay, if the applicant, now's your chance. Please give us your name and.
Okay, my name is Dave Muscarella. I'm the property owner. To answer those questions, there was a variance pulled in 2004, and all the work was completed and approved. So that was done and completed, I think, in 2006, 2005, somewhere in there. So there was a variance for, when we purchased the home, they didn't tell us that the garage wasn't permitted. And we went, about 7 years after we'd lived there, we put that shed up and realized when we went through that process that the garage was never permitted as well. So then we went back and did all that work. So there was a variance pulled, the permits were pulled and completed, and those, again, like I said, I think it was 2006 that all that work was completed.
Yeah, as long as you have the paperwork, that's
Okay. I wanted to let, I was hoping to hand you the affidavit that the sign was up 10 days.
Yeah, if you just hand it to Kathy.
And then I guess my only other thing that I'd like to talk about is I did go through, and obviously there's nobody here to contest, but I did kind of proactively go through our neighborhood more than the 400 feet. I went around my entire neighborhood and asked all the neighbors, and I just wrote something up that if they would support the fact that I was to do this work. And I got almost all the neighbors. I did not get everyone, but I got all but 3 in our loop that I live in there. I was hoping I can hand that in.
Yeah, sure, you can.
I'm going to keep you working here, sorry. All right, I don't know if there's anything else.
Any questions? No, it looks like you don't have to answer anything.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak to this issue? Seeing none, I'll close it off and bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Okay, I guess, accepting the property owner's view that everything's in conformance, I guess I would still, maybe since staff really wasn't aware that all the parcel is in conformance, just have a review to assure that that's the case before, and go ahead and approve it today, I guess would be what I think.
Yeah.
I see no reason to hold it up pending answer to those questions, because those don't make it any more or less likely that this would qualify for a variance on its own merits.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be, let's go ahead and make a decision on it.
Okay.
Besides, I'm sure he wants to get rocking and rolling on it. It's that time of year.
Any other comments, discussion? If not,
If not, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we approve the variance to allow the 31-foot front setback as described in the staff report, and approve a modification to the Golden Hills Estates Unit Number 2 subdivision final map, subject to the CEQA and variance and subdivision map modification findings that are in our staff report.
do I have a second? Second. Okay, I've got a motion, a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. It looks like you get your deal. And if anyone should wish to appeal, the time to file the appeal is 10 calendar days, and the appeal fee is $495. Okay. Good. Okay. Move to our 1020 item. With that, I'm going to have to recuse myself, so Jerry will take over on this item.
Okay, are you going to stay or leave?
We're supposed to tell people.
Okay, then
Oh.
we'll,
I guess for the record, I do have property that is in this project.
and Ken Donayo has left the dais, so we'll take over here. Jennifer, you're going to make the presentation on this, right?
Yes, thank you. Very brief presentation. Jennifer Dzakwik, Planning Department. The item before you is the development agreement review for the Placer Vineyards project. As some of you are aware, that project was approved in July 2007. The zoning ordinance, as well as the development agreement, require annual review of the progress of the development agreement. Also, as most of you are aware, in August 2007, there was a legal challenge submitted on this project. So little to no activity has occurred in the planning department as a result of the legal challenges. I'm sure that county council has been very busy, but planning, engineering, and surveying, environmental health haven't been doing very much. There has been one application for an amendment to this project that is currently in environmental review in our department. Also with that, I wanted to mention Ken McDermott is here, the applicant representative for the development group. He can likely answer any questions you might have on what they've been up to on their side. And with that, I'd like to suggest you take action to determine that developer today, that you would take action to determine the developer has complied with the development agreements and make the necessary findings that was listed in the staff report. And I can take any questions.
Any questions for Jennifer? Okay, your staff report indicates that effectively, because of the legal litigation, all activity is tolled because of the court order.
That is correct.
Okay. If none, then thank you. Kent, do you want to say anything?
Good morning. My name is Kent McDermott, and I represent the Placer Vineyards Owners Group. We don't have any comments to the staff report that Jennifer just presented, both in writing and verbally. I'm available to answer any questions that you might have regarding the project.
Any questions?
What's the status of the legal?
There's actually a court hearing date set in July. It's July 10th. Our legal folks, along with the county, have been working very diligently, particularly in the last, say, 4 months or so, but certainly over the last 2 years. So a decision should be made probably in August.
Are you actually heading to a trial?
Yes, to add on to that, we are currently in the briefing schedule. Real Party and County's response opposition briefs are due on May the 26th. The trial date is July the 10th. There are 3 different writs that were filed against the project, so we're busy preparing oppositions to the 3 different writs. The judge, this is going to be heard in Sacramento County, the judge has informed us that we should be prepared to be there for the day on July the 10th.
Wow, 2 years. Huh?
I'm sorry?
Who filed the suit against the county?
The one suit was filed by the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society. The second one was filed by 2 interested parties, Collins and I can't remember the name of the second individual, but 2 individuals. The third was filed by
Sutter County.
Sutter County.
Sutter County. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions for Kent? I guess not. Thanks, Kent.
Thank you.
Is there anybody from the public who would like to comment on this matter? Seeing nobody coming forward, I'll cut off the public input and bring it back to the commission. Any discussion, motions?
I would make the motion that the commission determines that the developer has, for a period under review, complied in good faith with the terms and conditions of the agreement and consistent with the findings.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, let's get Ken back in. Kent, would you send Ken back in? Yeah. Tell him his time in purgatory has expired.
Gary does a better job than Ken.
For $500, we'll let him back in.
Time consuming, it costs a lot of money.
50 cents?
Ken, we decided to put you on another committee.
Hey, I was going to take up public comment about 20 minutes of what I had to go through. Give me documents this thick. I think it's probably the only time that a commissioner's ever been appointed to a deal where they have more than 3 meetings a year.
Mine has one every quarter.
Quarter, but this is every month.
Yeah, but I don't get.
Environmental health is working me over pretty.
That's why you get the big bucks.
Okay, are we still up in? Yeah. Okay, we'll reconvene our 10:30 item, zoning text amendment, outdoor eating areas. Okay. Melanie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Placer County Planning Department is requesting that the Planning Commission recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of the zoning text amendment relating to outdoor eating areas. The Planning Department proposes to modify Section 1756-190A, Restaurants, Outdoor Eating Areas, and amend Section 1704-030, Definitions, Restaurants, and Bars, and Section 1754-0606, parking standards, retail trade uses of the Placer County zoning ordinance in order to modify the requirements of the establishment of outdoor eating areas. On April 23rd, 2009, a Planning Commission hearing was held for the outdoor eating areas zoning text amendment. After hearing reports from the Development Review Committee staff, the Planning Commission took action to continue the public hearing. Staff was directed to modify the proposed zoning text amendment to include provisions that would allow restaurateurs to migrate existing seating from the interior of the restaurant to the exterior of the restaurant on a seasonal basis without the requirement for additional parking. The purpose of the zoning text amendment is to modify the outdoor eating area section of the zoning ordinance so that it is less restrictive on the establishment of outdoor eating areas. The following changes to this section of the zoning ordinance will allow restaurateurs the capability of establishing an outdoor eating area without the requirement of a separate entitlement. The changes will also streamline parking calculations and will therefore make it easier for county staff to assess appropriate parking requirements. The current standards of the Placer County zoning ordinance limit outdoor eating areas to 25% of the indoor dining area, 5 tables, or a capacity of 20 people, whichever is more restrictive. Restaurant owners wishing to exceed these limitations have previously been required to obtain a minor use permit. Additionally, current standards for parking are half that required for the indoor dining area. Parking standards for indoor eating areas are 1 space per 100 square feet of use area, which means that the parking standards for the outdoor eating areas are 1 space per 200 square feet of use area. Staff previously proposed to delete the outdoor eating area section of the zoning ordinance altogether, add outdoor eating areas to the definition of restaurants and bars, and add a parking standard to the parking table, which requires 1 parking space per 4 seats of the outdoor eating area. In order to meet these requests of the Planning Commission, staff has modified this proposal. Staff proposes to keep the outdoor eating area section of the zoning ordinance, delete the capacity requirements, and modify the parking standards of the section. Staff proposes to include outdoor eating areas as a portion of the parking table. Per the Planning Commission's request, staff has incorporated a square footage ratio to the parking standards for the outdoor eating areas of 1 parking space per 100 square feet of use area. This standard is consistent with the requirement for indoor seating. Additionally, the Placer County Planning Department has also assigned a number of seats to correspond with the square footage requirement. The parking requirements for the outdoor eating area section of the zoning ordinance would now be calculated at a ratio of 1 parking space per 100 square feet of use area, or 1 parking space per 4 seats, whichever is more restrictive. Additionally, the proposal includes a footnote at the bottom of the parking table that would exclude seasonal outdoor eating areas from the requirements of additional parking, which will read, "Seasonal outdoor eating areas established by relocating seating from the interior of the restaurant to the exterior of the restaurant that do not change that total possible number of patrons to be served shall not be required to provide additional parking required by the standard." The Planning Department is in support of the Planning Commission's intent with regards to allowing for seasonal outdoor eating areas. However, staff is concerned that identifying different standards for seasonal seating may create a loophole for restaurants that cannot adhere to Placer County parking standards. Additionally, outdoor eating areas themselves are generally considered a seasonal use, and monitoring the adequacy of parking in relation to outdoor eating areas will be difficult, as restaurants could now fill these now vacant areas indoors with additional seating. Staff would like to recommend that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this zoning text amendment relating to outdoor eating areas to the Board of Supervisors. Alternatively, staff would like to recommend that the Planning Commission reconsider the Planning Department's original proposal and recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors of that zoning text amendment. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Refresh my memory, my concern was that we had the migration issue.
Right.
And you've addressed that, and I like the footnoted language.
Mm-hmm.
And I have heard your objections to it. A lot of these are kind of self-regulating in the sense that the neighbor will keep an eye on it better than you ever could. What portion of this was part of your original proposal that you want us to go back to? You want us to just drop that footnote?
Exactly, or to just the original proposal, which It was.
Nice graphics, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Actually, let me go forward. It's back here, but you would basically delete the entire section, and you would add the outdoor eating areas to the definition, and then you would have, excuse me, this isn't the correct one, but you would have one parking space per 4 seats. That's what we had originally proposed.
Yeah.
And so now we're changing it. It's either 1 per 100 or 1 per 4, whichever is more restrictive. So we'll account for that 100 square feet. So really, either of those would work, but the seasonal seating definition, I think, is where we're going to run into some problems because of that loophole.
Okay, thanks.
So I think you're saying that people are likely to cheat because they have a vacant space in the restaurant? Is that what
Exactly.
Okay. See, I was looking at this, and it's the revised text, I guess it's on the 1756 190A, where we're talking about one parking space per 100 square feet of outdoor eating area, or one parking space per 4 seats within an outdoor eating area, whichever is more restrictive. And I was trying to visualize what's generally more restrictive. Is like a 4-seated table, is the county looking at that as being roughly the same as 100 square feet?
That's basically what we're trying to generalize, that because 100 square feet, you very likely fit more than one 4-seat table in there, which is why we're giving it that it's either or, which would be more restrictive.
Okay. So at any rate, I was kind of visualizing, somebody that's got a sidewalk or a fairly large area outside the restaurant. They want to have outdoor eating, and they might tend to take up more than 100 square feet, or it may be hard to really measure 100 square feet where, the number of 100 square feet where the 4 seats seems to make more sense. But then when we talked about whatever is more restrictive, then I kind of, it became kind of a do loop for me, because I'm thinking, well, by more restrictive, I guess we're talking about the one that requires the most parking places.
Exactly.
So it seems like we'd want to say that rather than restrictive, because it kind of, it doesn't really explain clearly when you first read it what we're talking about.
Yeah, we could modify that language, I suppose.
Okay, and then
the thing is, generally, the planning department, when we are applying standards, we do look at whichever is more restrictive. For instance, we do that with setbacks. So I think that planners could easily, identify that, but I can understand that, I could see that that might not be so obvious to somebody who isn't used to reading the zoning ordinance.
Yeah. Well, I'm still a little bit naive, so you have to.
Well, I was referring to the public, but.
I'll admit to it. That's right. So at any rate, to me, it seems like just, put 100 square feet and 4 seats
One or the other.
kind of gets you into a confusing space trying to figure out exactly what we're talking about here. Where, I guess I was thinking if somebody moves some tables out on the porch or establishes some new tables out on the porch, if you go just by seats, they could spread them out a little bit more than having 100 square feet per table, but still would have enough parking for the people that are eating there. So I guess I would be in favor of dropping the 100 square feet outside, is what I'm saying.
And that's what we had originally proposed also, but what we found was there's an issue with square footage as well as the number of tables, especially when you're considering moving tables from the indoors out. Calculating by square footage might be a bit easier, because since parking is based on square footage with a restaurant, the indoor of a restaurant, if you were basing it on square footage on the outside, it just might be a little bit easier to calculate that, because indoor restaurant parking isn't calculated by tables, which is kind of why we had the either or. So you can either base that calculation on the same as what's indoors. That way you can sort of, basically it's to make it easier to identify that migration. So if you were to take those tables from the indoors out, you would take that square footage, whatever that square footage is, and then, kind of calculate what it would be outside. But being that that's a difficult process, we added the 4 seats also to make it hopefully a little clearer to planners if you were trying to regulate that.
Well, and thinking back to that meeting, I think one of the primary reasons for doing the migration, having that clause in there, was there's a lot of locations with older restaurants where maybe they have the opportunity with nice areas to put tables outside, but they really don't have the parking to do it, and it just seems it's I guess, more appropriate now in new restaurants and stuff that they do put outdoor seating built in with the indoor seating. And so it just gives them the opportunity, and I think too it was more probably up in the mountain regions that we were really thinking that this would be appropriate.
Yeah. Basically, our only concern would be that while we could address it as seasonal, they may still basically backfill that empty area within the restaurant and will create a parking issue, which is what we're trying to avoid. That's the planning department's main concern with the seasonal definition.
And Mr. Chair, just as a point of clarification, we haven't really had any parking issues. As you just pointed out, we're trying to address some existing non-conforming situations, primarily up at the lake. Based upon our current ordinance, you can't have more than 4 outside or 5 outside tables. Sunnyside restaurant exceeds that. Jason's up at the lake exceeds that. We haven't had any parking issues with either of those facilities, but we're trying to address the ordinance so that they can be in compliance and still meet the minimum parking standards. So staff feels very confident that we're not going to create any situations where inadequate parking will be created, but rather we will be allowing existing uses to come into conformance with our ordinance.
Okay. Any other questions from?
Yeah, I have a comment. One of my concerns is I want to make the burden on an existing business as minimal as possible while protecting the public interest. And you say that this is primarily at the lake. That may be true today, but may not be true tomorrow. And my wife and I went out for dinner just the other night. We went down to a movie. We saw Star Trek. Then we went down the street on Roseville Parkway towards the other movie theater, and there on the left was a whole brand new building. And we went parked behind, and they had a whole series of little restaurants in there that had patios out in front. And these were tables that they obviously moved out from the inside because the weather was nice. When it starts to rain, I'm sure they take them back in. And those are the people I want to make sure that we give them that option without having to come back in and kiss the holy stone of the county seat, so that we can protect everybody. That's really what I'm looking at, is make sure that they've got enough flexibility. And yes, they'll loophole it. You can't do faster than 65 miles an hour on the freeway either, but go out and drive around. And the best we can do is, everything is complaint driven. Somebody, the competitors will complain, and that's how we'll know that they've in fact backfilled on the inside.
Well, I know the majority of the people, myself included, if I go out and I drive around and there's no parking space and the restaurant's packed and out the door, I'm not I have to move on down to the next.
It's self-limiting.
Yeah, it's sort of a self-limiting type deal.
I think one of the additional increments to this is that those places that Michael acknowledged were the problem. Also, a fairly large percentage of those people come by boat. So parking in the parking lot, which is what we're talking about, is somewhat less important. I know Sunnyside, I never go to Sunnyside by car, or some of the others. Garwood, others that have large decks. Most people go one way or another.
So Larry, you want to amend this to incorporate berthing spots too?
No, I'm just saying that it's hard to nail down the accuracy of this thing. When you get, most of these places have bicycle trails passing by them. A fair number of people bicycle in, And so, pretty soon you can't get your arms around it. There's so many variables that I'm not sure how you can actually be sure that, I'm not so sure that the parking, I guess if staff feels this solves the parking problem and it's their best guess, fine. But
Maybe one way, and one question is, Melanie, has this been an issue where whether it's the public or adjacent businesses say, hey, look, this restaurant next to me is just taking in my whole parking field, and I can't do business because they're cheating? Have you ever had that instance?
I'm not aware of any.
And the answer would be no. We have not heard that situation come up.
I do tend to go with Jerry. I mean, want to try to make it as easy as possible on them, but not to where it gets out of control, where all of a sudden we generate something where there was never a complaint that all of a sudden a year from now you come back and say, this isn't working.
what about use permits for outdoor seating? What's the status of that, Michael?
Well, based upon the current code, any more than 5 tables would require a permit that would come before either the zoning administrator or the planning commission. I'm not sure which. And so the intent was to simplify the process, that if they had adequate parking, that it would be handled at the staff level rather than having it come before a hearing body. If it is the pleasure of the commission, we could look at and bring forward to the board the seasonal parking standard that was previously mentioned. As I stated, we are not aware and have not heard of any parking issues as it relates to outdoor seating. The primary issue was trying to bring the existing restaurants into conformance that had more than 5 outdoor tables. But we are not aware that there have been parking problems associated with outdoor seating. So if it's the commission's pleasure for the modified standard, we could take that forward to the board for its consideration.
Is that the one that was presented last week that we're talking about here now, or?
I think we're referring to the one that we're proposing today, which includes the parking standard and the asterisk that describes seasonal outdoor seating. Okay.
As far as the 100 square feet or 4 seats, could we, in that one, could we modify it to, or at least what I would propose is we modify it to, if it's outside, to just have 4 seats rather than confuse it with 100 square feet outside. To me, that would be confusing.
The planning department would be amenable to that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm not sure I understood what Richard said.
Well, under the new item, it's 2 under, what is it, about the 3rd or 4th page in, the 3rd page. There's revised wording that talks about parking.
Okay.
And for the outdoor eating, what it does is it lists 100 square feet of outdoor eating area or 1 parking space for 4 seats. And then it goes on to say whichever is more restrictive. And just to think through that, I would think if you're an owner of a business, to figure out exactly what that's telling you and how you're going to meet it would be very difficult. So if it just says 1 parking space for 4 seats outside, then that gives you, it's pretty cut and dried, makes it clear to you and everybody, and you don't have to think about what restrictive means. And
another argument in your favor is you don't have to play counting games in that if I have 6,000 square feet of patio, but I'm only going to put out 2 tables,
right,
then I know I only need 2 spots.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay, no other questions. Thank you, Melanie. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and action.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we do something
We did.
And-
Just have to figure out what it is.
Yeah, and I would move that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors approving of the zoning text amendment as set forth in attachment A, subject to the conditions in our staff report. However, the modification would be made to strike the reference to outdoor seating with 1 per 100 square feet and make it strictly 1 parking spot per table of 4. Did that cover what you wanted?
That's what I was thinking, yes.
And
Okay.
then you're including also moving tables in and out?
Yeah, well, the moving tables in and out was addressed in the footnote that's included as part of the recommended condition. Did I miss anything? Okay, then period.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Okay, moving right along, we will go to our workshop, emergency shelters, transitional housing, and supportive housing, and housing element implementation. So, with that, Jennifer?
Thank you. And before I get started this morning, I'd like to thank Kathy Denton of Health and Human Services, who's really helped me as well as the rest of the staff. Unfortunately, she had a meeting conflict and wasn't able to attend this meeting, but she has been really super helpful. And I hope we'll be able to come back when this item comes back again if we have additional more detailed questions. She's a service provider, or works with the service providers, and has really helped on this topic. So I really wanted to thank her a lot. But getting into this item, we're here for a workshop. And the workshop is to help you understand some proposed changes that we are working on to address special needs housing. And that includes emergency shelters, transitional housing, and supportive housing. My goal here today, or a couple of goals I have here today, is to help you understand the differences between these types of housing and to help start the discussion on how we should define these in our zoning ordinance, as well as talk about development standards and what zoning districts these uses might be considered in. And getting back into what changed and why are we here today, Senate Bill 2 became effective the end of March 2008, and included in your staff packet today was a copy of a memo from the HCD that helped staff understand what the changes were to Senate Bill 2 to these types of special needs housing. In particular, the Senate bill clarified and strengthened housing element laws in regards to emergency shelters and transitional housing and supportive housing. From that Senate bill, each jurisdiction is required to have at least one zone without a discretionary action for emergency shelters. They're also required to have the same development standards for residential and commercial uses of similar types in the zoning district. And there was some discussion and inclusion on what types of business practices you could and couldn't regulate. And really from Senate Bill 2 for transitional and supportive housing, they continued to repeat this type of housing will only be subject to those restrictions that apply to residential uses of the same type in the same zoning district. Again, as part of our housing element update, we were working through and looking at some of these issues, and there was 2 programs that came as a result of the housing element update. Program G2 and G3 both required that the county go back and look in updating their zoning ordinance to be consistent with the Senate bill. And I did want to mention that both of these programs were carryovers from the 2004 housing element. We made some tweaks to them, but they pretty much didn't change. So special housing need types, emergency shelters. When I started looking at this, I really wanted to understand the different types of housing that we're talking about here. Emergency shelters provide minimal support services for homeless people or persons, and they limit occupancy to 6 months or less. Transitional housing is a facility which usually helps with the movement of homeless individuals into temporary housing to get supportive services. And there's usually a limit to the stay that you can be in these facilities, and supportive services are provided. Supportive housing is it's more of a form of affordable housing that also offers some supportive services. But supportive housing is just like any other neighborhood. People live there, they pay rent, they have landlords. It's more of a affordable housing with supportive services. Again, trying to work through some of these definitions and really understand them. I tried to put some tables together to, again, clarify what the differences are. Again, transitional housing, you're limited to a 24-month stay, so you can only be there at that facility for 2 years. Support services are offered, and participation is required. That means if you're staying in this facility, you are required to go through the services that facility is offering. Some examples that you might be familiar with at Placer County is Hope Health and Healing and Peace for Families. Supportive services, again, no limit to the length of stay. It's permanent supportive housing. Their services are offered, but the participants are not required to participate in the services. And there are various examples in the county. All of them are through the adult systems of care, and I didn't have enough space to list them out. Emergency shelters, again, you're limited to a 6-month stay or less, and some programs offer services and some don't. And one that you may be familiar with is the Gathering Inn, but the county mostly participates or does voucher programs, meaning they give you a voucher to go stay in a hotel room. There aren't, that I am aware of, there are not any facilities that are permanent shelters within the county where somebody could stay and use that facility for 6 months. Most of the programs that the county offers are voucher programs through hotels. So once we got into that, we started looking at, it looks like I have a question now.
Yeah, I was just, you were talking about a voucher system, and you're talking about that for emergency shelters. It doesn't apply to the other areas, or just?
Does not apply to the other areas that I'm aware of. Again,
so you were just talking
excellent
about
question. I really wish Kathy had been able to attend. But my understanding is the voucher programs is mostly for people that have a temporary need, immediate need to have shelter, versus the transitional and supportive is transitional, the first step from going from that temporary need into getting into a program that has a place to live with services offered. And then supportive housing, you're just in the program and you're a permanent resident as long as you pay your rent. And you can choose to participate in some services, but you're not required to.
Okay. So here in Auburn, even though it's in the city, you have the Elm Motel. And so that would be like the Gathering Inn, an emergency shelter?
The Gathering Inn is kind of a unique thing. In fact, we'll talk more about that because we are talking about making some potential changes to houses of worship. The Gathering Inn is a program under which they do provide temporary emergency shelter services through churches. And so they have a mobile program which they'll take people to churches to stay, maybe for the weekend, have a place to sleep, get a warm meal, that kind of stuff. So that's the Gathering Inn. Doesn't use vouchers. The voucher program, as I understand it, is you come to the county. I'm having problems. I don't have a place to stay. They'll give you a voucher to go get a room in a hotel for the night.
Okay, and so it's really in the same category. What you're
Yes.
saying. Thank you.
What prompted this whole thing to come up at this time?
Well,
SB2?
SB2.
When was that passed?
It was effective March 31st, 2008. It was passed. I'm not sure of the past date, but it became effective in 2008.
All right, thank you.
So getting into developing and looking at different definitions in our zoning ordinance for these types of housing. right now, the current definition and what kind of we discussed in our housing element as we went through the background report is these types of uses, the county currently defines them as, we have no definition, or they're considered group living, which is a residential care home. So right now, that's kind of how we look at all these types of housing. And so what we're proposing is to come up with these new definitions. And I hope you guys got a copy of this. I gave it to Kathy yesterday. I cut and paste all of the definitions that we're looking at to help. You could have them on one page instead of flipping back and forth. And it's really small on the screen, so it's difficult to read. But these definitions, first we looked at the, of course, housing law and what was stated in housing law. And in that HCD memo on page 31, it provides the definitions from the state housing law of how they define each of these housing. But we didn't want to use those definitions. We started searching around at other jurisdictions. We looked at El Dorado County, Sacramento County, City of Santa Rosa, City of Roseville, and the City of Sacramento, and started looking at what the definitions, what could meet Placer's needs. And so staff is here proposing some potential definitions for these types of uses. And we did, instead of calling it an emergency shelter, we called it a temporary residential shelter. And I did want to get into a little bit more detail because, again, when we go back to the Senate bill, it did talk about having some more standards, development standards, business practices for when you're developing emergency shelters. And some of what we're talking about is also adding a section potentially to the zoning ordinance that would regulate development of emergency shelters. And the things that we gleaned and from the Senate bill would include these facilities have to be 300 feet apart, and the 300 feet is a law. You can't do more than that. That's said in the Senate bill. Another thing that we were looking at was requiring a minor use permit for any emergency shelter or temporary residential shelter that are proposed within 500 feet of a school and within any zone where a temporary residential shelter would not be permitted. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility to deal with the situation where you might have an emergency shelter coming in next to a residential zone and within 300 feet or 500 feet, excuse me, you might want to have some noticing requirements. You might want to have some additional development standards to deal with the potential conflicts between those two uses. In addition, we've talked about having temporary residential shelters meet all business and housing codes and fire standards, and establishing business practices that would include one staff member must be present on site when the shelter was open, providing adequate security lighting on the outside of the building. And one thing I know, probably about 3 years ago, I believe this item or a similar item came forward with a group of amendments, zoning text amendments, and there was quite a lengthy discussion about providing a 24-hour security phone line posted at the entrance of these facilities, so if neighbors were having problems, they could get a hold of somebody. So we would consider adding something like that, and having set hours for intake and discharge of clients, so people know when they need to be there and when they're going to be leaving. And of course, off-street parking is always a concern when you're talking about uses. And the Senate bill really talked about ensuring that off-street parking was based on a demonstrated need and was not more restrictive than the zoning ordinance for similar uses in that type of zone. And we were talking about having one space for every 10 adult beds with one space per employee. That's one recommendation we were considering. And again, all the parking needs to be off-site and, off-street and on-site. So again, walking through what else we were changing or potentially could change, the zoning districts that we would consider these uses in. And if some of you are familiar with, this is our, right out of our zoning ordinance, the table for residential uses. And then, of course, it lists our different type of residential, commercial, industrial, and agriculture open space zones. Advance my slide. So for supportive housing with 20 or fewer, they would be, again, matching this to what the state law was requiring us to do. Exactly, you'll see multifamily dwellings, 20 or fewer. This definition, or the land use matches the residential zoning types across the board. It's allowed by right in the in the multifamily residential zone, and use permit or some sort of use permit in commercial zones. Again, temporary shelters, same thing. We were proposing they would be identical to the existing multifamily dwelling. And transitional housing, again, same across the board. So with the changes that we were looking at doing, this also then creates a situation where previously we were defining these uses as residential care homes. So if you look at our existing definition of residential care homes, we're proposing that we could delete that entire definition and revise it with a standard definition. And this definition is more consistent. My recommendation is more consistent with state laws for residential care homes as well as other jurisdictions. And the key here with this type of residential care home is that you're providing a 24-hour non-medical care for the person. So that's really the key. And this is the one that is residential care homes serving 6 or fewer are consistent in the single-family zone. And again, we're looking at just giving some clarification. The gathering in, as we discussed previously, is already existing in operation. So we wanted to just clarify that under the definitions for houses of worship, that temporary residential shelters to provide humanitarian assistance was an allowed service that could be provided at houses of worship. So I'm sure there's some comments and questions from you, and then we can talk about what's next. Again, this is a workshop, so I'm trying to present it as these are some potential changes that we could be looking at coming forward. We do need to complete a CEQA review on whatever, hoping to have a firm project description nailed down today to move forward and do the CEQA requirements, and then come back to the Planning Commission to get a recommendation to the board.
Okay. Any questions?
Does this package go to the cities also for ratification of any kind?
No,
Or are they on their own?
The cities are on their own. This is strictly looking at changes to the zoning ordinance of Placer County. Now, the cities are also required to comply with the state laws, and many of them have. So some of the definitions that we looked at was from the city of Roseville, because they have these terms are already defined. And the cities have a lot of these supportive services already exist in Placer County within the cities. But this is looking at these types of services and these types of housing in the county's jurisdiction.
It'd be kind of nice if we could tie it all in one package, the cities and the county be together for a change.
Yeah.
May never happen, but it'd be nice.
I guess I'm still a little concerned, I'm not concerned, but confused in relationship to the vouchers for people who go to motels versus gathering in.
Okay.
And so, motels they have their own zoning ordinance, and may not be related to what we put in this ordinance. And so,
is your concern that we're not changing the motel zoning district, or, because those programs already exist today, they're already happening today, that, I guess when I started to work through this, I started to look, I was only thinking, oh, emergency shelters are something, a house or a building that people go to get that services, and it has rooms for people to stay in when they, are homeless. But the way the county deals with this right now is they don't have those facilities, so they use motel vouchers to basically provide a place for somebody to stay. So what we're doing here today isn't going to change any of that services that are already being provided today.
So if somebody comes forward with a proposal for a hotel, new hotel, then they'll be looking at the other zoning ordinances, but not this one.
If it is a hotel use, we would look at it as a hotel use, yes.
Okay, so
We
this
wouldn't
need to be
say,
open.
unless they came forward and said, this hotel is an emergency shelter only, and that's, you can't drive up, as a traveler, can't drive up and stay there. If they were defining themselves, if that business was defining themselves and providing emergency shelter services only, then they would fall under this definition. If they are just a strict motel, hotel, as we define those uses in our existing ordinance today, they would still be the same.
Okay, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, as part of the question, because I guess as I see it, if I was the hotel operator and somebody came in and they had a voucher, but I looked at them and I said, I'm not going to, I have the right to refuse service to any person coming in, as long, if there was a problem with that person, say he'd been drinking or whatever, yeah,
And then again, this is strictly looking at land uses. This is not, these changes that we're looking at are not looking at making changes to how the county provides services today with existing businesses. So the county has, again, I wish Kathy Denton was here because she deals directly with the service providers. But the county has a program in place. I'm not familiar with what hotels, motels participate, that they've already agreed that if an individual shows up with a voucher, obviously, they've come to the county, they've requested these services. None of those services would be affected by the zoning ordinances, changes that we're looking at today.
Except that if somebody has an agreement with the county, then they would have to be in conformance with this ordinance, wouldn't they? If they have a hotel?
Hadn't thought of that.
Unless you send them to the city of Auburn, and then all bets are off. I don't know.
Well, here's my answer. This is why it's a workshop, so we can get some of these questions out and answered before we come back to you. I don't have an answer for that. If Kathy was here, she could probably describe how the program works. I'll be following up with her on these questions that I can't answer, and I can certainly bring an answer back for you and make sure that it's clarified what the difference between those programs and those services provided versus the changes that we're proposing today.
Well, it just seems to me that when you kind of put the gathering in and hotels and motels that may have an agreement with the county for the voucher system in the same bucket, there's an opportunity for confusion that probably needs to be cleared up.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Come on, you guys are too quiet here.
I guess this is one we can open up to the public also. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on this, now's the time. Seeing none, I'll close it off to the public. And I guess it's not an action item.
No action item.
Just,
We will take the comments provided by the commission and incorporate that into a formal zoning text amendment, and we'll bring that forward at a later date to your commission.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to our 11 o'clock workshop trails update.
Where did you
Hey.
get this item?
Chris, looks like you're up.
Good morning, Commissioners. Christopher Schmidt with the Planning Department. Good to be before you again to continue our discussion about the county's trail requirements and our policies. Back in November or September of last year, we promised to come forward with a series of reports and updates about our current conditioning policies and where and when we required trails. We were here a couple months ago and returned today with just another update and where we stand. As you know, the issues of trail requirements are complicated and dynamic. We're faced with increased public demand, physical realities that trails cost money to build and maintain, some legal constraints about when and where we can require trails on projects before you, and we want to provide an update on the long-range planning activities that are currently underway with the county. And for that, we're going to turn it over to Vance Kimbrough from Parks, who's going to talk about some of the current initiatives that the county has underway.
It's not even our county.
Good morning. Was asked to come here today and provide you with a status update on the projects that the Parks Division has been working on. So before I did that, I went back and looked at the video from the February 26th meeting where you discussed the status of park planning. And there were some comments by the commissioners that said that, let's see, I got a couple of them written down here, that the trails planning seemed to be out of vogue, be woefully inadequate, and being the forgotten sister of development. And so I thought this was a good opportunity as a transition to this discussion to also update you on the status of the trail planning that you don't know about. You're never exposed to these projects that we're working on unless it requires a use permit. So this is our opportunity to hopefully bring you up to speed, and feel free to ask if you have any questions during the presentation. We have a great county for trails. Their trails are one of the more popular aspects of recreation opportunities in the county. Our diverse topography, natural communities, and spectacular scenery make our county an ideal location for a variety of different types of trails, including one of them is the Pacific Crest Trail. It's a 2,600-mile trail, and there's, I think it's at about 300 people that actually hike the entire trail every year, which is a little bit much for me, even though I'm a trails enthusiast. But the way this project, this world-renowned trail ties in is that the county is actually working on a project to build a trail that I'll talk a little bit more about that actually ties to the Pacific Crest Trail. Another world-renowned trail that we have is the Tahoe Rim Trail. And because I didn't have a picture of the trail in Placer County, I had to take a little editorial liberty here and show you a picture that I did have, which is above Sand Harbor. But I can make this work because he's pointing towards Placer County and saying that that's where the best part of the Rim Trail is.
Well, that's okay. The previous picture was in Nevada County.
The county also has a project that will be tying a trail to this trail also. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute.
Bottom line is no one that lives in Placer County owns a camera.
Another heavily used and very popular trail is the American River Bike Trail. While there's only a couple miles of it are in Placer County, it's a 32-mile stretch of trail that runs from Granite Bay all the way to the state capitol. Really no stop signs or anything along the entire route. It's special, and it's heavily used. And we have existing trail easements that tie to this in the Granite Bay area. We also have a trail that the county maintains, and that's the Squaw Valley Trail going from the resort out to the Truckee River. And then from the Truckee River, you can take Tahoe City PUD trails all the way to Homewood or Dollar Point on the North Shore. So that's an extensive trail system that's also very popular. And we actually have the Squaw Valley Park right on that trail that acts as a staging area for the trail. One last world-class trail that we have, or world-renowned, is the Western States Trail. As you probably know, a couple of major events each year on this trail. The 100-mile stretch from Squaw Valley to Auburn, the Tevis Cup, and the Western States Run. We recently worked with the Forest Hill Trails Alliance to build a staging area for this trail in the Forest Hill area also. As far as trail planning goes, I wanted to just remind you of a couple things we'd worked on with the commission in the recent past, and that was, one was the Bickford Ranch Trail Project. We had strong community input on this trail planning effort, and it resulted in the project dedicating 17 miles of public trails within that project. So that was a real successful collaboration between the community, the commission, and the Parks Division. Next major trail project is the Placer Vineyards. This one, as you may recall, has 48 miles of Class 1 trails in it. It uses the smart growth concept where the communities are bikeable or walkable. And so this is just another example of substantial trail improvements in future communities. Another aspect of what we do is we work with other agencies on trail planning. The city of Roseville sent us this in their draft bicycle plan so that we could look at ties to the Granite Bay area on this side and ties to the Dry Creek area over on this side. And so we commented on their plan so that they could plan on tying trails to the trails that we have planned within the county. The Forest Hill Community Plan, as you well know, was recently adopted, and it has a substantial trails layout in it. This is one of the scenarios that we'll talk about in a little while where this community plan had no trail plan in it. During the update process, we added a substantial trail network by meeting with local trails groups, 2 local trail groups. We also met with state parks, and we met with Forest Service, some guy named Rich that was tough to deal with.
He still is.
He still is. Anyway, just an example of how when community plans are updated that we can add a major focus on trails and meet the guidelines that are in the general plan. Hidden Falls is one of the several trail projects we have. North Fork American River Trail, Martis Camp Subdivision. These are all projects that are currently we're working on. North Fork American River Trail, you can't see the trail very well here, but it's 14 miles from the confluence of the Middle Fork and the North Fork going up to Ponderosa Bridge. The county has worked with the federal government on this project. That's why you didn't see a use permit for it, because it's all on federal land. And it's actually, the EIR has been completed and certified by the Board of Supervisors. There's currently a lawsuit by an environmental group that thinks the trail will, the EIR was inadequate. Let's just put it that way.
Just can't quite get there, can we?
Let's see. Martis Camp Subdivision is in the Martis Valley and also is currently constructing a lot of miles of trails. This is an example of one of the trails that they constructed just last year, public trails that tie Sawtooth Ridge area, if you're familiar with that, all the way over to the Army Corps property in the valley. So it'll make for a really substantial and pleasurable loop in the Martis Valley. Hidden Falls Park, I just wanted to bring you up to speed on that one a little bit. You may recall this is the existing Hidden Falls Park, 220 acres, that is currently open, and we have a use permit for that. Has about 7 miles of trails. It's heavily used. We get a lot of positive feedback on it. All the trails are multi-purpose, including mountain bikes and equestrians, and there's a lot of use. The only complaint we get about it is that it's not big enough. So the county purchased 960 acres adjacent to that, and it's currently working on an EIR, and we'll be back to your commission for a use permit for that this coming winter. But this will add 23 more miles of trails and combined be just under 1,200 acres for this total park site. Another project that we've been working on in concert with Placer Land Trust is these are the two, this is Hidden Falls Park, and this is that extension piece that we just talked about. And that, by the way, is all on Coon Creek, so it makes for a really nice park environment. We've been working with Placer Land Trust in an effort to obtain conservation easements and trail easements to tie all the way to Bear River from that park. So there will be a big trail network eventually, and I'm not sure what the status is of that. I'm sure that Fred could tell us, or Andy has been working on that also from our end. So, but I know that several of those conservation easements and trail easements have been obtained. This is a really exciting project that we've been working on. This is Martis Valley Trail project that I talked a little bit about earlier. This as something that would tie to the Rim Trail. This, and I'll show you a bigger picture of this in just a second, but the idea here is to tie from the town of Truckee right here to run all the way through Martis Valley with a Class 1 trail and all the way up to the summit eventually of North Star, and thereby allowing a Class 1 trail to go, I think this is about 10 miles, and also be part of a much bigger Class 1 trails network that'll provide a complete loop through Truckee, down the Truckee River, and I'll show you that in just a second. But just to update you on this, we are in a partnership with North Star Community Services District. We're working on the EIR and obtaining the easements right now, and it looks really positive. The Parks Commission just allocated a recommended allocation of $1.5 million to go towards the $4 million first phase of this project, and North Star CSD has been able to identify about $2.5 million, so we're really close to having all the money to build this trail. Hopefully get the EIR done this summer and build it next summer.
Can I interrupt, Vance?
Sure.
Right here. This trail, I assume it's the blue trail at the bottom, is going over Sawmill Flat to Lake Tahoe. Is that?
Right, that's right. It's just a different color because it's a different phase.
Yeah.
And I didn't get this picture all on here as best as I could. So.
And these trails are improved Class 1 trails for bicycling and
Right,
whatever.
right. 10-foot wide paved trails.
Okay, well, where this trail stops, I would like to see the county adopt as part of their trail system, depart from there on to Tahoe Vista and Tahoe City or Dollar Point if we could.
Yeah, let me jump to the
Am I
bigger
ahead
picture.
of you? If I am, stop me.
No, I was just jumping to the bigger picture so you could see how that is all supposed to tie together. This is the trail section that we've been talking about here. This is where it has a lot of switchbacks going up to the summit, but all at ADA grades. That's why it has so many switchbacks. So it doesn't exceed 5%, that entire trail route. And then this project would stop at the summit here, and then what Larry's talking about is all these planned trails within the basin, all the way to Tahoe Vista, tied to the Tahoe City trails, and which eventually create this big loop, and the town of Truckee's working on their part, so that you'd have this big, huge Class 1 separated paved trail that essentially you wouldn't have to stop on. And it would be just an awesome recreation opportunity for this area and for actually all the residents and visitors to Placer County.
That, if you look just to the left of that big arrow on the lake, there's a couple of birds' nests in there that have held up this $8 million trail now.
He's right in here, a couple of
7
spotted
years.
owls or something.
I got to tell you that it's pretty frustrating. We've spent, at the Conservancy, we've spent probably $1.5 million doing environmental review of that trail, and we still haven't satisfied everyone yet. And so I got to tell you, it's pretty darn frustrating to try to do nice things in communities with trails and stuff and still get blindsided for what doesn't seem to be a significant issue.
What kind of nests?
Probably
Goshawk.
owls, right?
Or they got.
Oh, goshawks.
And they're empty nests. I mean, they're inactive. They've been inactive for 10 years, but they say there's a chance they might come back, you know, it's like temporary housing thing we just had.
Yeah, now you, now you know why that.
But at any rate, I would sure enjoy any support I could get from the county, because I'm organizing a meeting this coming week with TRPA and some other people to try to break this logjam, because we've been sitting on money at the Conservancy that I just can't hold much longer. It's going to have to go somewhere else if we can't use it. And it's a shame, because it's a popular trail.
And now you know why that old ranger up at Forest Hill was so hard to get along with.
I thought he was, no, never mind. Anyway, Vance, I'm sorry to disrupt your...
No, I think that suggestion's a good one, and that transitions us into the bigger issue of how do we do trails planning. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Another project, and this is goes back to the first slide, is this is the cover page of a grant request that we submitted to Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and the scope of this project is to create a trail that runs from essentially Troy Road along Kidd Lakes, Cascade Lakes, all the way through, and this is this color route here is the original, as best we can tell, immigrant trail. In the mid-1800s, it was the most heavily used route going to the gold country. There's estimates that...
I think that lake was made after the...
There's estimates that 50,000 immigrants traveled over this route in one season, and it's a pretty spectacular route. And in fact, the Parks Commission recently recently allocated $150,000 to go as matching funds for this grant. The unfortunate part about it is that Sierra Nevada Conservancy, because of the state's problems, is no longer has put a temporary halt on selecting projects for funding. So they're having the same problem that we're having, to be frank. But anyway, this trail goes from Donner State Memorial Park, comes up Coldstream Canyon, if you're familiar with that. Roller Pass has a pretty interesting pass also, and then goes down through Sugar Bowl and down. The original trail went before the dam was built, went through Summit Valley down there. Quick comment on trails funding. And this is the construction aspect of it. We use the community plan, trails maps, routes to identify development, to dedicate and construct trails. Parcel maps are typically only to dedicate the actual trail easements, and that's if they're on the community plan alignment. The Board of Supervisors, your commission, and the Parks Commission continue to be supportive towards trail acquisition and construction. However, in the current budget situation, there are no general fund appropriations for trail construction and no general fund appropriations for planning. We have, our policy used to be that anybody that was on a community plan trail route, that the Parks Division, because we had funding set aside for trail construction, we would go out and do the surveying if anybody wanted to dedicate a trail easement that was shown on the community plan. Now we can't even do that because the surveying costs you in the neighborhood of $2,000, and we have to pay another department to go do that. So currently we'll still accept trail easements. We just can't even pay for the surveying right now because we have zero funds for construction or planning. So I just needed to set the groundwork for the discussion later. Maintenance, it's easy for large developments because they're all conditioned to provide trail maintenance through some form of tax assessment district. The current budget doesn't allow us to provide for maintenance for new trails that don't have funding sources for that maintenance. For example, like I was saying, parcel maps, we get the easements, but even if we had a bunch of easements in a row right now, we may or may not develop that trail because of, no matter how much volunteer work you have, there's always a small incremental impact to your workload when you're taking on another trail easement. The positive side of trails, I'm kind of going back and forth here with reality and the good things about trails. These are all recent surveys that were done, and they're all really positive. 83% of prospective home buyers preferred to be by hiking or biking trails, and as such creates a little bump in value. 75% of respondents in that Martis Valley Trail project, they did actually a big community survey for that to make sure that there was support to start with. And 75% of the respondents were very supportive of that trail project. 92% of respondents for that Forest Hill survey that was done for the Forest Hill Community Plan said they wanted to keep all existing trails. And 91% in a really recent survey done by the Donner Summit Area Association, I think that's it, DSSA, 91% of those respondents said that they use trails. So trails are really popular as far as recreation goes. Clearly, there's a lot of benefits from trails. The main one is from the health benefits or physical activity, but also provides opportunities for socialization, non-motorized transportation, educational benefits, and environmental and resource protection. In conclusion, it's clear that trails are an important part of recreation. People inherently know that open space and trails are good places that enrich their lives. Our department continues to work with other recreation agencies and the public to provide trail facilities where people from all walks of life can experience a natural environment in a way that adds value to their lives. That's it. I think we'll talk about the more specific issues now. But anyway, hopefully you're updated and know a little bit more about what we're actually working on.
Okay.
Do you have any questions about any part of the presentation?
Yes, I have a question. Concerning the maps, do you have a county-wide map similar to the one, for example, on the community plan from Forest Hill?
No, that's one of the things that each community plan, as we update them, we're inserting a community plan trails map if they don't have one. I believe Chris's information said there was seven or eight that don't have any trails maps with them. And so one of the options that could happen in the future would be a countywide trails master plan that would tie all the trails together, including other agencies' trails, into one big map. And clearly that'd have to be a big map or a lot of different pages, but that would be one of the benefits to having a countywide trails master plan.
And that's basically held up because of funding or because we haven't authorized it?
We haven't recommended that to the Board of Supervisors, and a lot of that more recently is because of funding. My understanding is there's no funding for trail planning, and our budget certainly doesn't have any for trail planning. So, and the current environment doesn't look like there'll be any money allocated towards that until the budget situation's better. Okay, Chris, did you want to talk some more? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So clearly, there's a lot of big picture trails planning going on. And to continue our discussion about when you're conditioning projects before you that are more at the local level, just a brief overview of our current trail policy. For parcel maps and use permits, we're limited by what the community plan map shows. As Vance mentioned, we run into a little difficulty because 8 of our community plans don't even have a trails map in them. Some are 30 or 40 years old. Frontage improvements are pretty standard for all projects you see. Public Works has requirements. Trails may or may not fit into those setbacks in the right-of-ways. And in specific plans in major subdivisions, rezonings, we have more leeway to require trail either along the road or through the community, because that's a more discretionary project. So we want to just briefly talk about what we came up with as some potential future work effort, and come back to you for a recommendation to the board on where we want to take this. And these are a few of the options that will provide either better direction or updates to community plans that will give us the tools you need to condition projects better. And that goes anywhere from reviewing and updating community plan maps as that process rolls out. We're maybe doing 1 or 2 every 3 to 5 years, so that could take a while. Vance mentioned creating a countywide trails master plan, which is a pretty significant undertaking with a lot of, it could be done in-house, maybe, most likely would require a consultant to come in and finish that up. Another option, C, would be to go to the Board of Supervisors just for better policy direction. Bring before them what we're doing now. Is this what you want to see? Should we be doing something different? So just a check-in with them to see if our current policy works. Another option would be to adopt a complete streets policy. This is planning jargon that says basically any project is required to provide pedestrian facilities that could be either a trail or a sidewalk. So if we adopt that, it has to go through environmental review. It's the new policy of the county. Developers will know up front that they're going to either be required to put in sidewalks or trails as part of their project approval, or a dedication of easement. Another option is E, is to do a series of community plan amendments. Just go into each community, updating the trail map, and adopting that, and that would be an amendment to the existing plan, so we wouldn't update the whole plan, it would just be a trails plan. The other option would be to do a general plan, update our current policies through the general plan update process, which is going to be underway shortly. It doesn't provide you with the real detailed maps that we need. It'll just give us better, maybe some clarification and some better policies. And that, I'll open it up for discussion. The goal is to try to get some feedback on which you think would work best. We'll take a look at them over the summer and then come back in the fall looking for a recommendation to go to the board to see what they think about where we want to go with this.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Vance for the presentation. I actually learned something from that. The fact of the matter is that I often hear you as being the saving grace to the trails in this county, and I thank you for that effort. And I don't belittle John either. The two of you have done a great job in putting together those trail plans. But I feel like I've just gotten the layout of all the interstates, and what we're addressing or trying to address are the feeder roads that come to these major trails. I use those trails too that you've described, and they're wonderful. But there's a lot more to it, and the community push that I was feeling as a representative in my community was to get some of these feeder trails. And over the years, I've been on this for, 13, 14 years on this commission, and many times these projects come up, and unless I make an issue of it, the trails just simply don't get put in. And Chris, part of it is because they're not shown on the community plan, master plan, and so of course the county's response is, well, it's not on the master plan, we can't put the trails in, and I understand that. But many times we're able to ask the property owner, and they are willing to provide the trails, or at least the easements. I also understand the funding constraints, and I'm of the opinion that it may be that we can't build the trails, but let's at least get the easements or the dedications for our children. Maybe they can build the trails when that time comes. What I would recommend for my fellow commissioners and ask of the staff is that we continue the process of looking at VE, community plan amendments, to update the trails master plans. Part of the reason for this process was to, number one, check with legal and make sure that we were on track legally, that we weren't going to step on a landmine somewhere and cause a blow up. And number two, I wanted to be able to present these plans out to the MACs, to the Loomis Basin Horsemen's Association, to the Preservation Trust, to the hikers, the bikers, any of these groups that want to see the preservation of trails, so that they can start looking at the trails maps and defining where the trails might be nice to have at the community level that aren't currently shown on the map. And it's the users in these areas that are going to know, not necessarily the commission. And only by starting that process in an informal manner will we be able to make some progress. Now, I realize, Chris, that the county's resources are somewhat limited, that right now you're tied up pretty well doing the PCCP, trying to get that through. That's a priority in the county, and I don't want to interfere with that. But to get these maps out for discussion, let's at least throw that bone out so that people can start gnawing on it. And eventually, it will lead to E. If you would feel more comfortable going to the Board of Supervisors, go to the Board of Supervisors. That's fine, but I think you'll find the same message there, and that is, let's see what we can do at an informal level to start defining the trails at the local level, so that when we come back and I hear the words, well, we're limited by the community plan maps, that what the community wants is on there. This has taken on an importance in the last couple of years because of the cost of gasoline, transportation issues. People are looking for alternative means, and one of the things that you had as an attribute that you missed, Vance, on your list was safety. People like to use these trails as opposed to walking along the edge or margin of a road in order to be a little bit more safe. Some of the folks out in the community can talk to the Placer County Water Agency. There are just natural trail easements along their canals. I know they might not be too wild about it, but we ought to at least start that discussion. And the only way we'll start is by getting it down to the local level so that we can have something a little bit more formal. That's where I was headed. I don't want a lot of time. I know there's going to be no money spent on this. That's a given. But the community volunteers, one of whom is sitting right behind you, Vance, Sharon Roseme, volunteer their very valuable time to push this effort forward. And I want to do everything I can to support them, because the message to me as a representative of them before this commission is get the trails in, expand the network, make it extensive. It's a great start, what you've presented to us, but it needs some enhancement. Rich?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts too. I guess since I've been on the commission, I've seen us address trails as these projects come by. And understanding that there's no way really to connect them up, but it seems like we're kind of piecemealing it together at the commission level. And one of the things that I notice is that as these various proposals come forward, we seem to be more and more moving from, the rural setting where we had rural roads and ranches and farms and stuff, and people really didn't have the need to or the worry of walking down the side of the road, as much as we move more towards the urban type character, where a lot of places we're looking at 20, 60 acre parcels that, though there's a degree of open space in them, they take on the character of a urban environment. And as people move in, of course, they want to move out, walk around, and so our roads don't necessarily satisfy the safety factor of people walking along the side of the road. And probably as we move through time, there's going to be more and more of a demand to have trails along these roads where people can walk safely to school or take their horses or whatever they're doing out there. So at any rate, it seems like what's happening in Placer County is kind of changing the demand and increasing the demand for trails, and I think that's what Gary's referring to. And so I think it does take a look. And what I'm thinking, I guess what I'm looking at is item D here, because what's also a little bit confusing is when we're talking about a proposal for Home Depot, a commercial development, it's almost a no-brainer to put in a urban trail, sidewalk. But the transition from sidewalks or urban trails to the more rural trails to the major trails that we talked about, that Vance talked about, it seems like there's a little bit of confusion between departments and exactly who's responsible for what. Now, Public Works, I think, sees their role as long as it's within the easement to, once the sidewalk's put in, to assure that it's maintained in the future. But then when we move beyond that, it gets a little bit fuzzy, and sometimes I know from the aspect of budget, the maintenance when you get out into the dirt trail systems is something that the county probably isn't going to be able to adopt unless there's some means to finance it. But at any rate, how the county is really going to handle the various levels of trails and provide for these connections in the future, I guess in response to the citizenry, is probably the issue. So I look at the options D and E as probably being the critical ones to start off with in here, where we adopt a complete streets policy that kind of identifies all the various types of trails we're talking about, from sidewalks on up to the cross-country trails, as well as start the process that Gary was looking at to get the idea of amendments to these community plans at the local level, at least at the discussion point. That's kind of where I think I'm coming from on this. Trails can be an issue, particularly the dirt trails. I know from my experience in the National Forest, if they're not located properly or maintained properly, they can become quite a problem from an erosion standpoint, as well as they become braided and they move around. And once the trail gets pretty well worn out and deep, then people find another location, or if a tree comes down across it, they'll form a kind of a trail around it just by walking around it. So there's some challenges there. But at any rate, I think we need to start at least at the level of D&E in our staff report.
Any?
No, let me finish up since there's no more comments.
Well,
You have a comment?
Yeah.
You're going to say something? I'm surprised.
I'm listening to what both of you said on that, and I think one of the areas, at least for us as commissioners, where it falls through the cracks, a lot of times on these trails, they'll show a trail somewhere else on a plan that we're looking at, and it doesn't really show us the overall picture of all these plans. So that way we can look, and if a project comes in and it's 60 acres and you can see where potentially it could come up and alongside, and maybe there's another vacant parcel that it would tie it in. So maybe it's not a complete loop trail or anything, but it's just a trail from one of these urban settings, as you said, Rich, that ties in to these trails. And I don't know how planning staff, when they're looking at a project comes in, if through parks and stuff, if they just ship it over and say, hey, look at it, comment on it, if there's really that interaction between all the different departments that say, okay, this is it's a major issue for people coming into Placer County and for existing residents, let's see how we can tie these trails in, and understanding that there's no money out there. But as you said, Jerry, if you can at least get the easements, if it's not now, the next 10 years, whenever things sort of come back, then there is the potential to get the trail system in.
Well, to invoke that old political adage, we got to do this for the children. So the system is somewhat fragmented, is what you were saying. We have these independent parts out there, and John and Vance do the best they can, but they're constrained by the community plan maps. What I'm saying is it's time to go back and address those again. Maybe not formally amending the community plans, although that would be an ultimate objective, but at least at this point, given the constraints on funding, staff time, and so forth, start the community input process, which could be very informal, to find out where the community perceives these trails as needed. That's, those are the folks who run the ship, and we need to satisfy them, and they know best where the trails need to be. Michael, do you have any input on this?
That task could be easily done with minimal expense at this point in time. And as staff noted, be working on this informally over the next couple of months. And should staff time become available, be ready to move forward with it if it's the direction of the commission.
Question, recreation mitigation funds in certain areas, are those available for this purpose? In other words, just trail system identification or some of those things? Vance is going to lynch me for this one, but it seems like in some cases, like you're talking about Loomis Basin or Granite Bay area, if the community steps forward and says, we would really like to see an update of this and we would like some of those funds used for that, is that a possibility?
It is a possibility. However, Granite Bay and Horseshoe Bar areas are actually owe money to the parks development fees right now because of the board decided to allocate funding that we didn't have yet towards several trails projects, so they borrowed from other districts because there were several big park projects in the Granite Bay area that needed to be completed. And so, yes, that's a possibility, but not at this time. But however, like I said in my presentation, $1.5 million from park development fees was allocated towards that Martis Valley Trail because it's in that area where it's been collected with Martis Camp, Timalik, all those projects, and will directly serve those residents. So typically we try to spend those funds in the area where they collect. In fact, by law, you have to.
Well, it might be too that as the state gets their stuff sorted out eventually, that the Sierra Conservancy would help fund something along that line.
Yeah, we're hoping so. Like I said, we have one grant application into them now, and there's certainly possibility for others. And once we get the EIR done for the Martis Valley, we'll be applying for other grants also.
Thank you.
I guess one thought carrying forward a little bit with what Ken was saying, one of the problems when these proposals come up, let's say a 20-acre subdivision that's within, the proposal's within the existing zoning, but it's going to have some density associated with it. And I guess what we're faced with is it's kind of the developer's discretion, I guess, whether he provides some kind of a trail easement on the exterior part of the parcel where it's adjacent to a road. But I'm wondering if there's some way in the process, either the EIR process or the negative neg deck process, that this could be evaluated on a little bit bigger picture in terms of if we put higher density development in what has been a rural area, what the picture looks like as far as a future trail location to connect up with other trails. It seems like there's kind of a cumulative effect there that as each of these proposals come through, if the Planning Commission is kind of piecemealing it in every time without a picture, a big picture, then it becomes difficult. I'm thinking of the recent proposal at the Atwood subdivision. We were looking at a proposal just to the west as well as county property to the east, and it was pretty clear that there was going to be a need at some point in time for a trail even across the county property. And so the commission addressed it, and the property owner was more than willing to accommodate the commission. But it seems like in a case like that, it would be good information for the commission if there was at least a thought or some kind of a discussion of the possibility of the future trails in the area. And I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Chris.
It sounds like it could be a discussion in a staff report, just looking at where are nearby easements we have, existing trails, what's the big picture plan for regional trails close by that development proposal, just to give you better guidance about what links are possible, and maybe a staff recommendation of does a trail here make sense. Mm-hmm. So it's a good thought to provide you with the information of what's existing nearby, to see if those links are doable and ultimately will lead to someplace.
Okay. Well, I'd appreciate seeing that if we can fit that in somehow.
And two, piggybacking on that way, if a developer comes in or somebody that has property that's near that, they're aware of it, so it's not something that they come in and they're always blindsided here that, oh, this is something that's sort of an extra where they can build it into the plan, and I think it makes it a lot easier for them and actually for all of us.
We've got, I know at least one community plan update or review in process now. Is there plans on commenting on that and getting requests in time for that, or?
I think, doesn't that fall in number A? 'Cause
Well, I was looking at E there, and like I say, I know that sometimes you're talking about initiating that review just for the trails, and others, I'm saying right now we've got reviews in process. Doesn't it make sense to?
Right. If the Granite Bay Community Plan update moves forward, trails will certainly be something we'll be looking at. And I know the trails map was just revised a few years ago, but we'll take another look at that to see if it should be added to or anything revised in that.
Send that map out to every group you can think of down there, every church, every Boy Scout group, every Girl Scout group, every horsey group, every mule group. Bicycles saturate the place and get all of their inputs.
And I think there's a few community plans where we know where the issues are, so we're not talking about 15 community plans, maybe 2 or 3 where it's continuous and coming up before you, and there's unclear on the trails maps. Maybe it's West Placer, Auburn, Horseshoe Bar, Granite Bay. Those were, it seems to be where we run into our most difficult.
Although Harry Crabb, I'm sorry he left, he told me that after this surfaced, that he started getting calls from Roseville because they want to make sure that they can tie in with this, which is part and parcel of what Vance was saying. And he got a call from Lincoln. They said, don't leave us out. Yeah, they want to be a part of this. They got trails. So it has more impact than just those few.
Okay, thanks. Now's the opportunity for anybody in the public to comment, and I know there's a couple out there that come right on up and.
I'm one of your trails gadflies. And actually, I was delighted. Each of what each of you said I agree with wholeheartedly and completely, so I'm not sure I need to be here at all, but I am. These aren't mutually exclusive either. There's no reason why we can't do community plan amendments at a trails-only kind of mapping level. And as each community plan is revised, also deal with trails, and perhaps try to incorporate that into a Placer County Trails Master Plan, but not as a condition, of moving forward, so that something that might require an EIR and all of that isn't a necessity before you start simply implementing now. You've got a great set of policies, a great set of goals. They're really comprehensive. They make sense. They're tied together. So here we're talking about implementation. It's to have a master plan as a condition to moving forward would be, I don't know, like trying to skin a grape with an axe. There's simply no reason to do it in that way. So that's basically my overall comment. The other comment is I'm quite sure that I and other trails advocates are ready, willing, and able to get the kind of community input, to get the kind of survey of existing trails, whether or not they're formal, to talk to PCWA about the irrigation ditches and the trails along those. I've had interest from the town of Loomis, from the Dry Creek people, from all the conservation people, and from PCWA about at least getting input into what's there, what might be there, what would work. And there are sources of funding, too. I mean, there's the Trails to Schools money, which hasn't been robbed yet by the state. I'm sure they're after it. But there's both federal and state money there, and we haven't tried to do that. And the ones that have been in California that are getting grants are big concrete pedestrian overcrosses on freeways. We're talking about dirt, 5-foot wide dirt. And Placer School, for instance, has all kinds of trails that kind of get there, that are in segments where just addition of stuff, often which is owned by the public. There's a, what do you call it? Anyway, PCWA has a reservoir behind there, and there's an informal trail that's been used for 50 years probably. And if they're willing and it's there, And I know the property owner between there and an existing trail segment, is willing to grant an easement through her mandarin orchard, and everybody uses it anyway. That sort of thing, tying together what I call rural sidewalks, basically, connecting stuff is exactly what you need to do at the community level. So what I'd be asking for, though, is county cooperation consistent with resources in terms of getting that. You've got the mapping capacity. Surveys are expensive, I agree, but often easements are not specific. It just says you will dedicate a meandering, an undefined easement, if, as, and when other segments are constructed. But getting community input now with the county's help, whether it's mapping, whether it's simply identifying which roads have a 50-foot right-of-way so you don't need an easement. All you need to do is take an unimproved portion of that right-of-way. But it's pretty hard to find out what the width of existing right-of-ways for ancient streets is. And if the engineer has that at the tip of their fingers, or a way to get it, or a way to tell the public how to get it, I'd really appreciate sort of a formal commitment to helping, if the rest of the community is willing to do the footwork to find out from everybody in the world and their sisters what people want. So we'd have a combination of a wish list and a survey when you're ready to start updating community plan maps. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks for this project. It's really most excellent.
Anyone else? Fred, do you have any comments, or, I guess we addressed it. Thanks, Chris. Good job.
Says, do you need anything formal from the commission, or you think you have a sense for what?
I think we have a sense. We'll come back with some recommendations, likely in September, last meeting in September, and then go to the Board of Supervisors with the recommendation.
Get out of here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for coming today to the Planning Commission meeting, and we will see you, next one.
At least some of us will.
Yeah.